the video you just watched and answered a question about has a lot to do with how we got to this question of why are rock samples from the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains composed of such similar minerals, even if they look so different and come from different areas. After you watched that, you were asked to write down 2 things that you learned. Hopefully you wrote something about how rocks are composed of minerals. So 2 things that I wrote down after watching that video was that 1, geologists can tell a lot about how a rock is formed from the minerals that actually make it up. The other thing I wrote down is that rocks from very, very different areas can be made of the same exact minerals. What we want to try and figure out is why that is true. So we're going to be looking at these 2 different areas, the Rocky Mountains and the Great Plains. You saw that the teacher in the video showed a map really quickly of where these places are. Rocky Mountains would be this region running through the country from top to bottom. Very mountainous area. We'll look at a picture in a second. And then you have the Great Plains, and she talked about Nebraska, which would be right about here. Very flat area of the country, kind of like the middle of the country. We call it Great Plains, like very low, flat hills. So what we're looking at are 2 areas that look very different like this. What you're going to do next is actually tell me how are these 2 places different and how are they similar. Now, looking at these pictures, I can probably really quickly tell you a whole bunch of ways that they are different, but they do have some things that are similar as well. So below, you're going to actually answer at least one way that you can tell these 2 places are very different, and at least one way that you can tell that they are similar. What we're going to be doing after that is starting to investigate these claims of how do the rock of the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains form. If we can figure out how they actually formed, then we have a better idea of how these 2 minerals or how these 2 rocks were able to have the same minerals, although they're so far apart. So the ideas that they had in the videos, or in this last video, the claims that they came up with, those 2 students, were claim 1. He said that they formed as one rock formation and then something actually separated them apart. And then she said that one rock formation could have formed before the other, and then the minerals from the older rock became part of the younger rock. So saying that the rock actually changed from one type to another, and that one part is actually much older than the other one. Now, they kind of left this open-ended, and the teacher said, well, we're going to figure that out. So that is what we're actually going to do. In order to do that, we need to figure out how these rocks formed. And in order to do that, we need to actually look at some rocks. So on our next section, we're going to start looking at some actual rock samples, and you'll start to make some observations and tell me what you see about those rock samples. What do you notice in them? What colors are they? What do they look like they're made of? And then how could they be similar or different? Your exit ticket is going to ask you the same thing. So make sure that after you make those observations, you also watch the video for some of my observations before you move on to your exit ticket. Before we do that, though, we're going to look at a few vocab words that are going to be important going forward for the rest of the lesson and into next week. One should be very familiar, and this is matter. Anything that has mass and takes up space is matter. So all of the liquid, all of the gas, all of the solids on Earth, they all take up space, they all have mass, so they would all be considered matter. A sample. I've already said that we're going to be looking at some rock samples, and you've probably done this before, but a sample is just a small part that is meant to show what the whole is like. So when we talk about a rock sample, we're not going to be bringing in a giant rock formation. We're going to be just bringing in one little piece of rock that shows what the entire rock would be like. So it might just be a small broken off piece of rock. You could also think of this as like if you have a sample of a food. If you ever have been to like a grocery store where they're giving out samples, you just get one little bite, and then if you were to actually buy that food, you would get the entire meal. So just a small part that's meant to show what the entire thing is like. And then finally, rock formation. Rock formation is a region of rock that formed together as a single rock type. So the picture here is actually the Grand Canyon, and that would be a really good example of a rock formation. It is an entire region where all of that rock formed together, and it is all the same type of rock. That would be a rock formation. So before you move on to making your observations about some different rock samples, what you're going to do next is actually answer a quick question on what those 2 different regions have in common and what makes them very different. And then also answer a couple quick questions with these 3 vocab words. If you need to, you can always come back and check this video again to help you out with the vocabulary questions.